Learning the graphic design principles is only half of the game. Having an established and professional design process is something most successful and top-end designers use every single project. Now, without a process, your designs are going to lack direction and also the quality that they could actually achieve. So let's take a look at a professional 8-step design process. When you get a message from a potential client, what do you do first? What is the first thing that you do in your workflow? And remember that your job as a designer is to solve a problem for a client with visual communication. I like to send a client a questionnaire asking them things about their business and what needs to be worked on. And from there, I then formulate a brief based around the target audience, specifications for the project, as well as a whole host of other information. Sometimes the client will give you a brief if you're lucky, and other times they won't. But I still like to expand on the brief they give me. You will need to discuss the project with your client first and foremost, and so don't just get a business or a company name and then maybe a color scheme and think you can just start designing. That is a very, very amateurish kind of approach, and it's going to prevent you from leveling up your design career. Step number 2 in our design workflow journey is also crucially important, but can you guess what it is? It is something I consider very essential, and the next step doesn't actually involve any designing, though this doesn't mean it's any less important. After a designer has received a brief and also knows what the client needs from them, they should embark on some research. This step of the process involves gathering as much information as possible to help inform your design. This is going to dictate the direction of your design, and it's going to map out future decisions relating to the project. You want to build a profile of your client to ensure you understand what the brand is all about, what their target market is, the industry they operate in, and also their competition in the business world. The more you know, the better. Whatever your skill level, if you have research under your belt, your designs will be better than they could be without. A very poor designer with limited skills would be able to turn a horrible design into maybe a passable design. But a high-level designer, if they use research, can turn a passable design into a highly effective and high-quality piece of work. Step number 3 is compiling your research onto a mood board, and this can either be digital or physical. I personally use Milanote and #not sponsored in today's video. You want to create a visual sense of the project and your client, and you can do things like compiling color schemes, relevant imagery to the brand, notes about the target market, fonts, and so on. This step is just, compiling things together in one place. Briskly moving on to step 4, I'm going to ask you, how much brainstorming do you do in your design process? In terms of graphic design, brainstorming is the first step towards deciding how you're going to tackle the client's brief. This means deciding what you're actually going to design for the client. Now, brainstorming involves putting pen to paper, or maybe pen to drawing tablet, and systematically coming up with ideas on how to efficiently solve the problem given to you by your client. I also like to generate keywords in this step of the process, for example a logo design project. On my True Art brief, I generated these keywords here based on my research, and these keywords played a huge role in the next step of my process. Once you finish the brainstorming phase of your process, now you have to choose what is going to work best to fulfill the client's wishes based on your initial ideas. You must eventually whittle down your choices to a single standalone concept. But in this concept creation step here, it's time to use your research, your mood boards, your brainstorming to generate relevant concept ideas. So this is where the creativity begins, finally, and everything before this point has been a systematical way to gather information. And that is actually arguably the most important part of this process. So when you have 2 to 3 very strong concepts, you can now use whatever software or tools that you want to, or which are going to be appropriate to your project. These could be Adobe Creative Cloud programs like InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator. It doesn't really matter what you use, and this is your chance to experiment and find the best way to turn your conceptual ideas into actual designs. You might find that your concept doesn't translate to an actual design that well, and so you need to be objective rather than subjective. If something clearly does not work, then you can throw it into the trash and then move on to something else. You might even have to revisit previous steps in this process, and you should always be referring back to the brief as you go along this process and your journey. So after you've had fun exploring and experimenting, it's time to refine your design into something that you can present to the client. Start off with a bit of a self-critique. Look at what you've designed so far and see if it's responding well to the brief and the information that you were given in the previous steps. Compare it to your research and ask yourself, is it applicable to the target audience? Does it respect and relate back to the client's brief? Once you've answered these questions and any others that you think are relevant, you can then mock up your design in a way that resonates with your client. So for a logo, you can display your choices and make a kind of visual story, and also present the logo on something physical that you can find in the real world. This is going to demonstrate the use of your design being kind of functional. Once you've got feedback from the client, head back into your studio and try your best to respond to that feedback. It might even be worth jumping all the way back to step 4 in the brainstorming phase depending on the kind of feedback you get. But yeah, do take on board the client's feedback and again be objective, not subjective. You want to leave out any kind of emotion you might have out of the equation. The client has set a brief and they are paying the bills, so you're going to have to be flexible to keep them happy, but of course within reason. You don't want to be used and get stamped all over. You should be working with a contract, and so you're not going to be taken advantage of in terms of time and revisions if you are using a contract. So there is the 8-step process, and let me know if you do follow a similar process for your design work. And if you want to learn something else today, do click a video on screen. And until next time guys, design your future today. Peace.